Michael Medeiros, here for the last PrinceCast of the semester. Joining me are the outgoing and incoming executive editors for Opinion, Mendy Fish and Camille Framrose, and we're here to talk about some of the best, or at least most provocative columns of the past semester. So first, I thought we would talk about feminism. There was a series of back and forth columns on the issue. So Mendy, do you want to introduce us to some of the perspectives that were presented there?
Sure. Well, I think the first column that was on the topic that I remember was Carolyn Kitchener's column called "Where Have All the Feminists Gone?" And she was basically lamenting the fact that she couldn't find any feminists on campus. She tried looking for feminists, but all she found was a sketchy guy at the printer who tried to talk to her. And I think that got a reaction from the feminists that were actually on campus saying, "Oh no, we're actually here." And so we had Lydia Dowlett write a column responding to that, saying that she was a feminist on campus, and she's a junior, and she's been here. And in the meantime, David Mendelsohn wrote a column that sort of called out his friend for whooping his ass when when he offered to help her carry a box. But he pointed out that there were feminists who were sort of militant feminists, and there were feminists who advocated feminism in his mind, more, I guess, rational way. And so by the time that Lydia's column came out, she wanted to respond to both of those, and I think she responded with a very sort of informed and detailed history of feminism and sort of classification of different types of feminism, and also a description of what it means to be feminist on campus. And somewhere in there, we also had a column by Alan Paltrow, who talked about feminism as well, responding to David's column. Also with sort of a discussion. I think he compared the feminist movement to the gay rights movement and discussed more radical elements of the gay rights movement, like likening them to more radical elements of the feminist movement. And he discussed more moderate aspects of the gay rights movement. So that was the rundown on feminist columns that we had this semester, I think.
Sure. So, Camille, how well do you think that reflects the actual feminist dialogue on campus?
I think that consistently the opinion section tends to see a lot of columns about what feminism is and whether it has an extremist component and whether that's okay and whether it's justified to go so far in promoting feminist movements. But I think that what was interesting about this semester is that there was the question of whether there is a feminist movement on campus or not. And I think that was an original idea. And I think that sparked a lot of conversation about what it means to be a feminist and how you should be a feminist in daily life, like whether you constantly call people out or whether you promote it publicly by wearing those t-shirts that they have. So I think that mirrors a lot of the dialogue that happens on campus, and it was really interesting to read that and to see columnists responding to each other and guest contributors coming in and responding to them, so that was interesting.
Do you think feminists on campus are generally pretty open like that?
I think that if you talk to anybody, it's highly unlikely that you'll find someone who's not a feminist at Princeton. I don't think anybody is willing to come out and say, no, I don't believe men and women are equal. And I also think that we tend to see less radical elements, like the whole thing that David Mendelsohn was saying about feminists not approving of chivalry. I don't think we see that often at Princeton. But I do think, and this is a personal point of view, not necessarily an opinion section point of view, but I do think that the feminist movements at Princeton tend to focus on issues that are specific to America, and therefore everybody gets all mired in debate about chivalry and about equal wages and equal opportunities. Whereas if you look at the rest of the world, it's a far more serious question of like life and death in some instances. And I think Princeton could use a little more of that perspective sometimes.
Yeah, that's really interesting. But in terms of campus, do you guys think that, having old systems like the eating club system, Bicker system, could that reinforce unequal trends in feminism?
Well, I think if you look at the Bicker system, I don't think that is discriminating against women. If you look at the numbers of Bicker, there's no really effect of being male or female on whether or not you get into a club.
But in terms of reinforcing gender roles or something like that?
I think there was a lot of discussion about women being in leadership roles, which is what
Right.
led to that task force that's led by President Tillman. But I don't think BICA tends to enforce gender roles, but I do think that there's something about eating clubs wanting male presidents. And I don't necessarily think that that's like sexism in force. I think it's just that because that's the way it's always been, people just think that that's the way it's going to be. And I think it's starting to change. I don't think that the eating clubs in themselves enforce gender roles. I think that's just something that's in the process of changing.
I think that, along those lines, another column that we have that was related to feminism was by Sophia Lemaire, and she wrote about the women in leadership, and I think that what she was saying was that it was the impetus, she was putting the impetus on women to sort of step up and take those leadership positions. Now, I'm not sure whether, and I guess we'll have to wait for the results of the Eating Club Task Force, but rather the problem is that women aren't getting elected or that women just aren't running.
Right.
And if the problem is that women aren't running, Sophia Omer said, why don't you step up and run? And she also pointed out that women lead in a different way. Women are, and I think this has been a finding of the Eating Club, of the Women in Leadership Task Force, that women are often in officership positions, but just not the president, maybe in a more behind-the-scenes position. But I think that her point was also that if that's how women want to lead, then that's just a different way of leading, and we should accept that. I apologize if I'm misrepresenting her view, but I think that those two views were sort of conveyed in her column.
Yeah, interesting. Well, another controversial issue on campus this past semester has been the hummus referendum and columns on Judaism in general. So, Mendy, I know you're involved in the CJL. What have you thought about this progression of columns and the hummus debate?
Well, I mean, so I guess to summarize, we had the first Israel-related column I think that we had this semester was Brennan Davis came out and wrote a column, The Politicization of Judaism, and in that column he pointed to the trend of Jewish organizations unconditionally supporting Israel and sort of saying, since when did this religion, which say 70, 80 years ago, before the State of Israel was not really a political religion, since when it become politicized, and sort of lamenting that fact. That got a lot of views, started a lot of dialogue, and it was like sort of foreshadowing to later in the semester we had on campus a big debate over the hummus referendum, and I think that we really saw, first of all, a lot of, both sides were writing articles in our section, and we also saw, I think, Jewish organizations getting involved, sort of like Brennan Davis predicted in his column, and so I think that it was definitely, for me, coming from the perspective of being involved in the CJL, it was definitely like a challenging time because I was initially editing the columns that were on both sides, and then when the CJL ended up stepping in, I ended up not editing the columns. By then, most of the columns had already come out, so I was in a little bit of a difficult position. But I mean, I thought that it was, first of all, with Brennan's column, I definitely, I think, agreed with Brennan that with Brennan that Jewish organizations do tend to support Israel. I mean, I think that that's part of the mission statement of a lot of Jewish organizations. And if you're somebody who questions Israel's policies as an American Jew, that can definitely be challenging.
Right.
And that was something that we encountered in the CJL when the CJL presidents and the CJL director came out and offered an opinion on the referendum. We, on the one hand, we sort of felt compelled to do that because it was part of our mission statement to support Israel, just like Brennan Davis said. But on the other hand, there were people who disagreed with that position, who then felt uncomfortable. So I think no matter what, Judaism is sort of a religion of contradictions, and it's often very difficult to walk a fine line with regard to a lot of things, and I think that Israel is certainly one of them.
Interesting. Camille, what do you think about the dialogue that these columns and the hummus debate largely on campus started?
I think it started I think it gained a lot more interest than any of us were anticipating. Certainly more than I was anticipating.
I think no one was
It
anticipating national
took
news
off
organizations.
in this really crazy, bizarre way where we had we had 4 columns in total, 2 representing the view that the referendum was wrong and 2 representing that it was right. And we tried to keep it very much like yes, no, to make sure that we were representing both sides equally. And it was interesting to be editing one perspective one day and a different perspective the next day.
Right.
And we had a lot more people coming up to us who wanted to write about the hummus referendum than we could possibly have. And even a month later, people were still asking us to write about it, and we had to be like, no one wants to hear about hummus anymore. I think that was the most interesting thing, that nobody felt like they could say, oh, I don't care about it. Everybody said that, no, I voted yes, I voted no, and it became a really polarizing issue. And I think that, I'm not entirely sure what I think about it yet, but I think that it is commendable to start this bigger movement on campus and to get people to care about something and to try and start a referendum in support of the things that you believe. So,
right.
Irrespective of what it is that you believe. So I think that was commendable.
Another student project that started a lot of dialogue this semester was No Fat Talk Week, which was interesting because the Eating Concerns Advisors had this program in past years, but it never really garnered the attention that it had this year. So Camille, what did you think about the columns that were about No Fat Talk Week and the issue in general?
First, I think that part of the reason it garnered more interest was that, at least from whichever Eating Concerns Advisors that I've spoken to, they made an attempt to get the word out in a way that they haven't before, that they were spamming listservs. I think the listservs were the things that created the most controversy, sending those emails. Because everybody's on one listserv, so they're bound to get the email at some point. We had a bunch of columns on it. We had, I think, David Mendelsohn was the first one who said that No Fat Talk Week was not necessarily the best idea because it was enforcing political correctness in a way that it shouldn't be enforced on a campus. And the really interesting thing was we had Sophia Lemaire write a column, and she is an Eating Concerns Advisor, so she wrote a column in support of it saying that it was about making people feel comfortable, not so much about political correctness, but giving people a week where they did not have to be, well, not that they did not have to be the butt of jokes, but that weight would not be the butt of jokes and that they wouldn't have to feel uncomfortable because of their weight.
So what do we think about the fact that No Fat Talk Week eventually sparked a lot more dialogue about body image on campus than if there hadn't been a No Fat Talk Week?
Right. Well, I mean, I think that they sort of had, in the end, what was a smart move with, calling it No Fat Talk Week. It was a name that was out there, and they really, by making people say, whoa, this is like shutting people up who, want to just talk about people being fat, or it's like making everybody be politically correct, it really got a dialogue started. It was a much greater effect than if they had just said, we're going to have Positive Body Image Week, or some other week that sounded more boring than No Fat Talk Week. And I think that even with David, for instance, David Mendelssohn's column, even with his column, he said, I'm concerned with anything that makes me try to be politically correct, because he doesn't like being politically correct, but he still ended up supporting No Fat Talk Week for the reason that they did, that he realized that for somebody who's anorexic or for somebody with eating disorders, talking about fat can really be harmful. So at that point he realized that his political correctness has a boundary and that it's actually sort of harmful to people to not be politically correct in that case. So I think that even columnists who were a little bit put off by it, and even people on campus who were a little bit put off by it, actually got their message.
Camille, as incoming executive editor, what do you think about the broader issue of political correctness on campus and whether it constrains or dialogue, or how to create dialogue in this environment?
I think that political correctness is necessary to a degree, particularly in the case of things like No Fat Talk Week, which I think that there's a point where you're actually hurting somebody else's feelings, and I don't think that's okay. But I do think that Princeton tends to be a little too stifling, and that people are either concerned with appearing intelligent and therefore not questioning other people's views because, I'm a very accepting sort of person and I'm not going to interfere, you have the right to think whatever you want. Or just because I don't know whether it's just wanting to not offend somebody else, like a friend or somebody who you feel that you're close to and you don't want to offend them. But I think that people don't call each other out enough on different opinions, and people don't have difficult discussions on campus as much as they should. If somebody's offended, they can say, I'm offended, I don't want to talk about this, but that shouldn't prevent you from asking the question in the first place, I think.
Right.
I think we had a bunch of columns on that sort of similar topic this semester. I mean, I think Luke Seal ended up writing a column called Lighten Up Princeton, in which he told people to lighten up and not be as worried about sort of putting themselves out there. Jacob Reese's The Fear of Being Unremarkable, a great column, also talked about people being afraid to sort of say what they think or out of fear that they're just going to sound dumb. And I think people sort of come to Princeton and they have this, I mean, it's sort of like a superiority-inferiority complex where they come and they're sort of used to like being on top of their stuff, and then they come and they think that everyone is so much better than them, and then they feel really inferior, and they're unused to that happening, so it's sort of just like a self-identity crisis. And I think Jacob sort of really nailed that issue on the head there with his column discussing a feeling that I think many people at Princeton have.
Yeah. No, certainly I think you're right that there's a self-censorship effect, both for not wanting to sound stupid and for not wanting to sound politically incorrect. But it's an interesting role for the opinion section to play. Well, thank you for watching the last PrinceCast under the current board. We hope you join us again next month.